So last week was the season finale of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, and this is going to be my complete Season 2 review of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I think I said that way too often, but you know what, we're just going to roll with it. But anyhow, so I think Season 2 was a great installment, a great addition to Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and to the Star Trek canon as a whole. There were some good character moments, both lighthearted and also risk-taking. A musical episode, come on, was so amazing. I did feel like, I think I mentioned this in my review, that there were a few moments where I thought the auto-tune was a bit obvious for a few of the actors, but overall, they took risks and nearly every single time they succeeded. But let's actually discuss each episode individually, and for that, well, this is going to be a compilation of all my reviews, but stay towards the end because then I'm going to be giving my overall concluding thoughts on Season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So let's jump up right in with Episode 1 of Season 2. Star Trek Strange New Worlds has finally come out with its second season, the first episode being The Broken Circle, and that is the episode I'm going to be reviewing today. So it is the season premiere, and I thought it was a pretty solid episode overall. Were there some things that I thought they could have done better? Definitely, but overall, yes, I'm just going to jump right on to spoilers, but there's a scene where Dr. Mbenga and Nurse Chapel have to fight some Klingons, and apparently they take basically some kind of drug, like a stimulant, something like that, to fight them. Here's my thing, they're doctors, and we've seen doctors use some kind of concoction with their hyperspray to knock people out before. Why couldn't they just do that, just, constantly drugging the Klingons with some kind of sleeping medicine or something like that? That would have been so much cooler than them actually fighting, because it would have shown them being doctors and the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, so having them take a nice little sleep would make more sense, but they didn't do it. That's probably my only qualm with the episode, that they chose, let's have a cool fight scene with our medical personnel, rather than, let's show off the creativeness of our medical personnel. That would have been much more fun. But there's so many other great elements. Yeah, that's pretty much my only complaint. I'm actually happy that they didn't start out right away with Una's trial for lying about being genetically engineered. I'm actually happy about that, because that's how every other Star Trek show would have picked up after the last cliffhanger. Instead, they decided to create a roadblock, meaning to delay the story, that being Una is having trouble finding a lawyer, and so Pike decides to personally go and try to plead with one lawyer to get them to help Una. Okay, that's good. Create a roadblock. It also means that this episode is focused on every character other than Pike and Una, just a little bit to check in on them, what's going on, and then it's everyone else. I thought that was a great way of opening the episode. And then, of course, we get to see Spock command the Enterprise, which this might be the first time he's actually done it. And so he's a little unsure and all that. But also, some people might call this fan service, but this is fan service done right. So, in the last episode, when Spock released a lot of his mental blocks, his cognitive blocks that him as a Vulcan is using to help control and suppress his emotions. Therefore, his emotions are a bit more up there. He's actually experiencing things like stress, especially when Nurse Chapel walks into sickbay. I'm just saying. But Dr. Mbenga gives gives Spock that Vulcan instrument that we see him playing oftentimes in the original series. So with that kind of recontextualizes all those scenes. Yes, it's a neat little piece of lore, Spock is getting the instrument he often plays. But it's also recontextualized, showing that it's one of his methods of dealing with his emotions. He'd probably say, it's only logical that I use music in order to help suppress my emotions. He would do it in such a logical way, but we all know the real reason why it is, so it's actually he's doing it for the logical reason, but also by doing it, suppressing his the emotions that maybe are hard to control, he's calming himself, and being calm is a form of an emotion when you really think about it. But yeah, Spock has many great scenes, though there is one scene I also do take a little issue with. It makes good sense emotionally and storytelling wise, but strategically. It doesn't, like, leaving the bridge during a potential battle with a Klingon battle cruiser to go check on this chopper, make sure she was successfully beamed back onto the Enterprise. Yeah, no. And that's not the best strategic choice. Makes good sense emotionally in the story that they're telling, but from a real life strategic standpoint, it's not quite the best thing. But it also does make a little sense, because would TOS era Spock ever do that? Probably not, even with Captain Kirk. So what that probably tells me is he's less in control of his emotions at this time, and by the time of the original series, he has regained the control that he lost near the end of the last season. So it can make sense, but I wish they had done it slightly different, like maybe some character, like, saying, like, we should have done that. I don't know. But overall, I did think that it was good emotional storytelling, good character-driven storytelling, just bad strategic storytelling, if that makes sense. And strategic storytelling is not the most common thing in Star Trek, so we don't really need to worry about it too much. But there's several other great scenes as well. We meet the new chief engineer, who is said to be over 100 years old, and this species I think is relatively new to Star Trek, but kind of gives me the same idea as Flint from the original series, but I'm thinking different. But one interesting thing about her character is she's been stuck at Starfleet Academy and doing inspections that she's bored, and she wants to become the chief engineer of the Enterprise, so that way she has something to do, so she's not bored anymore, which is just hilarious. So I'll just say right away, Spock and the crew do steal the Enterprise, and she catches up what they're doing, and she's like, "Ooh, excitement!" And so she helps them steal the Enterprise. Is just so perfect. But also, if that makes me think, if I remember correctly, Nurse Chapel and Uhura and Spock was the reason why the Enterprise was stolen in the search for Spock, but Uhura went on this participate in stealing the Enterprise, and so did Nurse Chapel in that movie, if I remember correctly. She stayed behind, but still, like, isn't like, I wonder if they had some deja vu about this. I'm just saying, because it's kind of hilarious that happened again, and some of the characters are in fact the same characters. Only two of them, but still, everyone often forgets about Nurse Chapel because she doesn't actually go on the mission, which, given the context of adding in Strange New Worlds to her and Spock's relationship, it is kind of interesting, but wouldn't be surprised if they do come to some kind of understanding that kind of explains the relationship that we do see in the original series. Hard to say for sure, but it is something interesting to know that how this episode is recontextualizing in a good way a lot of TOS and TOS era movie scenes. So is there anything else I could discuss? Oh, plenty, like how the antagonists of the episode have a kind of similar plan to the antagonists of the Undiscovered Country. A bunch of, in this episode it's mostly Klingon, but I think there's some Federation extremists who want to restart the war, not have peace. I do find that kind of interesting very much. It's a kind of borrowing a plot element, but it's doing it in a different way. Instead of being high political maneuvering on the upper levels and trying to blame people and all that, this is like, hey, let's just do something big and bold, which indicates that this is more the more stereotypically Klingon idea-led plan rather than more of a Federation-led plan. Oh, what I'm getting at there, but it's kind of interesting. Like, some of the same plot beats, but it does show how kind of why it does, I think, kind of help add some context of why so many, both Klingons and Federation citizens during the Undiscovered Country were willing to conspire against both their governments to derail the peace talks. There's a lot of bad blood between the Klingons and the Federation, and the idea and opponents of peace have been working in the background for years trying to find any way to reignite the war. So I do find that very realistic, if you will. There's always going to be people who take qualms with two opponents having peace, and members of both opponents' faction also taking qualms with that. And it would make sense that there will be conspiracies to try to restart the war and the peace. So it does recontextualize, in a way, makes the that movement less out of nowhere in the undiscovered country. But regardless, they still, I think, did a very good job with all that recontextualization of just small elements in the original series. There's a lot more I can talk about too. I haven't even talked about. I forget her name. Why can't I remember her name? She's the reason why Spock steals the Enterprise anyhow, because she sends a distress message to the Enterprise, and everyone decides, yep, we need to go help her stop this conspiracy against the Federation. I've blanked her name, the one who's has the same last name as Khan. Lon is the name. I can't believe I forgot that. But so she's helping that one girl that they rescued from the go and reconnect with her family, and that's what leads her to discover this conspiracy against the Federation. It's nice and connected, but also provides a lot of unique and good character development for our main characters. Puts them in positions that they wouldn't normally in, showing some of their more inexperiences and stuff like that. But probably the best thing is at the end, Spock is able to basically prevent a war by agreeing to drink blood wine with Klingons, and the Klingons are like, you're no ordinary Vulcan, we like you, which is just so amazing. But it also kind of, like I said, recontextualizes stuff in the original series, namely in the Undiscovered Country, which was a character that led the movement on the Federation side for peace with the Klingons. Spock. I wonder if this experience taught him a valuable lesson about Klingon culture and how to approach them and make peace with them. Agreeing to drink with them, for example. And then Spock gets off with just a warning by Admiral April, basically saying like, okay, that Klingon hangover, that's enough of a punishment. But the real reason why he was let off is the Federation's expecting a war with the Gorn. And that's where the episode ends. So I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more going on with the Gorn in the rest of Season 2. And I have a feeling next episode will be Una's trial, but we just gotta wait and see. Anyhow, I do hope you enjoyed my review. I also would love to hear your thoughts on the episode The Broken Circle in the comment section down below. So I finished watching Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 2, Ad Astra per Aspera. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So this episode, it's what probably most of us were expecting Episode 1 to be, the court-martial of Una for being genetically engineered, being an Illyrian. So that's what the episode is about. It picks up, with Pike going to find a lawyer to represent Una because, he feels like she needs somebody who can actually win her case, because the person she's assigned to by Starfleet, the one scene he's in, you can tell he's not giving his all, so probably shouldn't really be in that career then if he can't give his all. I mean, Riker in The Measure of Man did not want to, take the case against Data, but he still gave it his all. He still did his best. He didn't just roll over because of all that. He still, even though he didn't want to be prosecuting the case, he was forced to, and he still gave his all. He did, his duty. This officer wasn't doing his duty. He wasn't doing his best. So that's a clear difference there. But moving on from that, we get Pike does manage to find a lawyer who the context clue indicates it's a lawyer who's a childhood friend of Una and also an Illyrian who could not pass. That's something they've used multiple times, passing. You often saw this, especially back in American history, where African Americans who looked white could pass as white and thus not be subject to the racial discrimination. They drew that distinct parallel, and I think it was no accident that they decided to cast a black actress to be Una's lawyer for this. I guarantee they wanted to really make that point known that they're drawing this connection between the Federation's prejudice and discrimination against genetically engineered individuals and the history of racial discrimination in not just the United States, but many other countries as a world. And they specifically actually called the lawyer a civil rights lawyer, not just a lawyer or a defense attorney, but a civil rights lawyer. So they were really wanting to draw that parallel and show how the Federation has this blind spot in the society that, yes, they're a utopia in many regards, but they turn a blind eye when it comes to discrimination against the genetically engineered. And of course, as would be expected, at the very end, Una is cleared of all charges, but that's only because of clever lawyering. Like, the Judge Advocate General, you can definitely tell that he's a Vulcan, and he's in a way kind of blinded by the law. Like, at one point, he literally takes over the case from the JAG officer that he had assigned. It was only for one testimony, if I remember correctly, but it was like crazy. Like he was kind of pushy. Being an arrogant Vulcan, a Vulcan much more suited for Enterprise than TOS. Like, there's literally a scene where, it doesn't look like Spock has an outburst, but he goes up to Dr. Mbenga and the helms officer and mentions that he's sorry for his outburst. Didn't look like his outburst, but Mbenga picked it up on, and he literally says that Vulcan brings out the worst in him. Like, isn't that kind of crazy? And that kind of shows, like, this, he's just a nasty character, more suited for how the Vulcans appeared in Star Trek Enterprise, which is kind of interesting to kind of take a note of, and how, not every Vulcan is like Spock, which is probably a very important thing for us fans to remember. And another kind of little touch they're going on too, how I mentioned the JAG officer who was assigned to prosecute the case before, who I think is actually the Judge Advocate General. She's, that the woman we saw Pike had a relationship back in episode 1 of season 1, and kind of mentioned on and off, I think, in some other points. But the thing is, like, you can tell she's not happy about prosecuting Una, but she's still doing her job. Unlike the officer who was assigned to Una's defense. I'm just saying, at least, maybe they should have switched roles, is all I'm saying. Of course, the most surprising thing that came out in this episode is we learned who turned Una into Starfleet. Any guesses? Well, it was Una. And her lawyer, who was also a child friend, uses that to their advantage once she kind of pieces the things together, because Lon thought somebody had leaked her personal log, where she talked about how when she learned about when Una was genetically engineered and all that. So she was afraid that she was the reason why Una was revealed, but ends up it was Una herself. But basically, figuring out who had the motive. Well, who had the motive? It was Una. And to put it short, she was tired of hiding. And her lawyer, who was also a friend, they also make amends, because apparently they parted on bad terms when Una left for Starfleet, but probably started actually when Una and her family were able to pass as non-genetically engineered. I'm just saying, that's very much what the context is saying, that is what started the friendship down, but it seems like things started getting repaired here. And one kind of nice touch with that is, by having Una testify by her own childhood, she was able to literally, and quite smartly, have the prosecution read this one regulation in Starfleet's Code of Military Justice, I think is what they call it. I forget the exact term, but basically the Starfleet regulations, not just Federation law, but kind of talking about the process of asylum. And she cleverly, using other people's testimony, Una's testimony, but mostly Una's, was able to get everything to line up in Una's favor, even when the Judge Advocate General himself, that Vulcan, got Una to admit that Captain Pike had known about her genetic engineered status for like 2 months before Starfleet discovered it, and like he was like willing to engage in the whole conspiracy. By cleverly pointing out that Una, like, in a sense, she turned herself in and was granted asylum, not formally, but still the process was done, just not in the formal sense. And this brings in what I think is the only misstep of the episode, Admiral April's testimony, mainly because I feel like, so his testimony was actually devastating for Una, and that's probably why the prosecution caught him, but I feel like like the other testimony for basically when he was cross-examined went wrong, and not just because she got him to basically discredit himself, which could have been a very good strategy. However, I think it would have been a better strategy to establish that Starfleet captains have prerogative to disobey certain regulations when it fits the greater good, or the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I mean, that would have been another very good sneaky thing to throw in there. I felt like, okay, I'm no real life lawyer. I'm just a nerd who likes watching Star Wars and Star Trek, but I've watched 1 or 2 Star Trek legal episodes, and also I've watched a few breakdowns of legal cases, and I feel like that was a misstep. And also, I feel like it made some good courtroom drama, with a witness outburst and all that, but I feel like the line of questioning could have done better to not get stricken from the record, therefore helping her case in the end, because what he said, she calls back, the prerogative of captain staff, but she shouldn't have done that if it was stricken from the record, right? That, I think, what they were showing, like, the writer knew just enough about courtroom drama to know that things can get stricken from the record, but forgot that things are stricken from the record, they can't be brought back into court. I think that's what might have happened there. So if they had just rewritten Robert April's testimony and cross-examination, that would have made this episode 10 out of 10. But because of how they did it and how they tried to reference it back, but it was actually stricken from the record, which means it shouldn't have reappeared in the legal sense, I'm only giving this episode like a 9 out of 10, because this was a phenomenal episode, but that little bit right there was just gnawing at me. Like, you did such a good job for, not being a real court and all that I could see some real-life lawyers who react to things like this would be like, yes, this seems pretty good, except for this. Like, but that's just a lay opinion on my end. But overall, I did think it was a really good episode with good drama and a good outcome. So, yeah. And I really did like I mentioned, how this episode brought forth one of the Federation's many blind spots. This blind spot being towards the discrimination against the genetically engineered. We see this again with artificial life in the TNG era and afterwards as well. So the Federation does have blind spots, and I was glad that they did bring that stuff up, because it kind of shows that Starfleet's not perfect and the Federation is not perfect, but they're working towards it. And this episode shows one case where working towards it. Probably what helped in this case was because they were able to rule on they didn't rule on the law, which makes sense. It's not this was establishing, which law should basically be applied. Are these charges valid? And they determined that because of Una's specific situation, that she was not guilty of any charges, and thus was allowed to stay in Starfleet. But that was only because of her specific situation. That's why later on, in DS9 Bashir, he, if his father didn't accept the plea deal, he would have been drummed out of Starfleet. And why in Star Trek Prodigy that Darrow could not join Starfleet, but he was able to get special compensation to be basically a warrant officer, a provisional officer under Admiral Janeway. It's because he was given a special status. It's kind of like Una has said, like, okay, we're going to give you a special status because of your unique situation, and that's it. And Bashir is probably the most realistic case in the Federation. It was a plea deal. And Una was offered a plea deal, which would have still been not great for her, but at least she would have avoided jail time. But getting a good lawyer really did help her. But that's where I'm going to conclude this review. I do hope you enjoyed my review. Also, let me know what you thought of this episode. Add Astra per Aspera in the comment section down below, which also the title of the episode was apparently Starfleet's original motto before the Federation, which choose the stars through hardship, something like that, which resonated with Una. So it was also brought into the testimony, which, I mean, it was a great scene, and just watch the episode, you'll really enjoy it. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. So I just finished watching the third episode of Star Trek Strange New World Season 2, that episode being Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. So to begin with, this is a time travel episode. It's not my favorite time travel episode. It's not even my favorite of just Season 2 of Strange New Worlds, but it was a damn good episode in my opinion. And this episode was also a Lan episode. Everything in the story was in service of her character. So we haven't gotten too much in her character yet, but this really deals with her character and a little bit of the baggage that she is carrying. The episode opens with us learning about kind of her daily routine, and we can learn that she's not the closest with the crew. She really doesn't have that many friends, though. She and Una are friends. They kind of gloss over that in this episode. But I can understand why they chose not to address that part in this episode, because I think they really wanted to focus on more of, outside of, a professional friendship, but more of just, people to hang out with. Sure, Dr. Mbenga is a sparring partner but it's just a sparring partnership. It's not a friendship at all. And of course, with her and Una, lots of their friendship seems to be a professional friendship, that's all around, the work and all that. There was that one episode in season 1 where they tried to let loose, but that was the only time, there's not that much of, you don't get the sense that they will just, go to the ship's recreation room or bar and just hang out, drink, chat with other members of the crew. You don't get that sense. And definitely for Lon, that is definitely the case. She doesn't seem to have much of a social life, if you will. So kind of setting up that she's isolated, that she's lonely, which does play a role in the episode. But at a certain point in the episode, she's just walking around along the corridor of the Enterprise, and somebody appears. We learn that it is a temporal agent, a time police, if you will, and he has a bird wound, and he hands on a device right before the time he disappears from the timeline, and the timeline changes. He tells Lon to go to the bridge. So where does she go? She goes to the bridge of the Enterprise, and guess who's the captain? Because it's not Pike. Yep, it's Captain Kirk. Kirk is now once again on the Enterprise, but besides her not being there, and not supposed to be there, and Pike not being there, and Kirk being there, there doesn't seem to be that much other changes on the Enterprise besides the insignia. That is the very first thing I noticed, that Kirk's insignia was different. It was still a delta in some ways, but it was more of a diamond than the Starfleet delta is. But that is the first thing I took note of. And we find out it's the United Earth Fleet. Not the United Earth Starfleet, the United Earth Fleet. I'm sorry, but in Enterprise, it was still Starfleet. But the thing is, the point of divergence between these two timelines is before Star Trek Enterprise, before First Contact. And now at this point, we don't know what the divergence is. And Lon and Kirk and Chogman, they both get sent back to present day Canada, Toronto to be specific. And I do actually like that. We finally got a Star Trek episode where they go back in time, and they don't go to United States, whether that be California, New York, or some other place. I am glad that they went someplace different. But it does create some more questions in the future, but we'll get to that point later on in the review. So they gotta figure out what's going on, and Kurt's reluctant to do anything to change the timeline, because he wants to keep the timeline he's used to, while Lon is like, well, my timeline is gone, I need to restore it. So there's some conflict there, and there is one thing that eventually, when they're talking, that gets Kurt to agree to figure out what changed, and therefore to work to, change it back, if you will, to restore the timeline to what Lon remembers. And that's when Kirk hears that his brother, Sam, was still alive in Lon's timeline, because apparently in his timeline, George Samuel Kirk did not survive some kind of event. So he changed his mind for a personal reason, which is very interesting to take a note of. So as the episode goes on, there's other things going on, like I mentioned earlier that this was a Lon episode, not a Kirk episode. And unlike like many Kirk episodes, there's a love story. The thing is, Kirk is not the romantic lead in this. Lon is. Lon and Kirk this alternate timeline Kirk do seem to fall in love very much. They have a kiss and all that. But the thing is I kind of like this because it's a change up, because, yeah, Kirk is a bit of a ladies' man. He's been presented all from the media, but what I really like in here is the story is not being told from his perspective to service him. No, it's being told from Lon's perspective. She finally found someone she could connect with. I mentioned earlier, how the episode set up that Lon did not have that many close friendships, people she could just hang out with. And here she is hanging out with Kirk, falling off and finding someone who does not prejudge her because of her name. That should have been the first sign she had that something was amiss in the timeline, that Kirk had no knowledge of what Noonien Singh meant. That should have been her first clue. But the thing is, there was another event going on. The event that happened both timelines bridged the destruction, which turns out was caused by the Romulans. And the Romulans are involved in this episode a lot because, well, the technology needed, but they encountered a conspiracy theorist who has a picture of a Romulan warbird, which could recognize as not Spock, not La'an. Though Spock was in this episode as a Vulcan captain in the alternate timeline, and also just himself in the regular timeline, but that's not really a major part of the episode, just a fun thing there, and I used my little gaff there to mention it. But this conspiracy theorist she has a lot of crazy conspiracy theories. Weirdly right about one specific thing, that being having that picture of the Romulan warbird. Of course, as we find out later in the episode, that was deliberate on her part. Because, well, we find out, we're going to jump ahead, that she's a Romulan temporal agent who's trying to prevent the Federation from forming. And she's doing that, or she, or at least another Romulan, was responsible for the bridge's destruction, but she's trying to kill Khan Noonien Singh. And if her mission succeeds, the Federation never formed. And that's why Kirk does not recognize Noonien Singh, because Khan never became a tyrant in his timeline. So this episode actually does deal with one of the most common hypothetical time travel questions. If you could go back in time and kill Hitler, would you do so? This episode addresses it by saying, if you do that, something worse may happen, whether it be in the immediate future or in the distant future. The episode basically settles on the idea it's best just to let history, that the timeline continues the way it has always happened and the way it is happening, rather than try to change it from the designated course. That's very much a little deterministic, if you will, but Star Trek time travel episodes have always kind of that deterministic mentality about the past, and we do that as well because it already happened from our perspective. But how would we feel if someone from the future came and say, you need to change how you're doing this, otherwise this will happen? We might have some different interpretations. Kind of wish that would be addressed a little more in Star Trek, but at least they did, have an answer to the question. And this episode, and that's also why La'an was chosen by that one temporal agent, because she's related to Khan, being a descendant. And probably he figured that anyone else he could randomly pick probably would kill Khan, but she has a personal interest in not killing Khan, because if Khan's killed, guess what happens to her? She's probably not going to be in the timeline anymore. But that's also why probably she wasn't on the Enterprise or any other fleet, United Earth ship, because of that reason. And though, weirdly enough, in this on timeline with no Khan, Earth is actually in worse condition than it is with Khan existing. Probably something to do with the Romans, because this Kirk was not born in Iowa. No, he was born in space. He lived in space. The real Kirk was born in Iowa, so just another subtle change there. And of course, the new engineer, Patty, she makes an appearance in this episode because she's been on there for a long time. And La'an goes to her to get some engineering advice, though this is before she becomes an engineer, though this might also be why she becomes an engineer. And they get a watch that they can use to check some radiation to help locate the reactor that they think is going to be destroyed as a part of the change of the timeline. Well, yeah, that's technically correct, but the reason the reactor was destroyed was not to destroy the reactor, but for the Romulan agent to kill Khan. And ends up being they do stop the Romulan agent, the Kirk is killed, or the ordinary Kirk, because the real Kirk is still alive, and La'an saves Khan. And you can tell this is hard for her because, again, she knows who Khan is, and probably the only thing that's keeping her from doing it herself is because her own self-preservation, but also the idea that, well, this is the way the timeline went, so we really shouldn't be changing it. So that's essentially the main thing of the episode, but the episode ends. La'an goes back to the Enterprise bridge to make sure everything is normal, And then she goes to her quarters, where she's met by another temporal agent of the Department of Temporal Investigations. They're back, and unlike in Deep Space Nine, they're actually time traveling now. Now, this is obviously from the future, the perspective of Deep Space Nine, because they have time travel abilities, while in Deep Space Nine, they were only bureaucracy, only keeping files and records and all that. But I do appreciate that they popped up. This also connects them nicely with the temporal agents from the Temporal Cold War and Enterprise, and then also the Time Police, and all that, the time shift relativities that we saw in Star Trek Voyager. So connecting all that stuff up. So time travel is a mess and all that. There's no way of going around that in Star Trek. Time travel is a mess. But time travel also explains a lot of the continuity errors, if you will, because the eugenics world keeps on getting pushed back. This episode is set in the present day. Yet the eugenics world, according to the original series, happened in 1992. But also another thing to take a note of is that Romijn temporal agent says that she's been trying to kill Khan since 1992. So either she keeps on doing things that are changing the timeline, pushing the eugenics wars back, or there were unreliable records, so she went to the wrong point. But the thing is, time travel has evolved and seems to be messing with a lot of stuff, time-wise, especially in Star Trek. But one kind of other thing to kind of note on that, going back to the temporal agent, is she takes the device back from Lam, but tells her so that she can't talk to anyone about it. Well, she's just been through a lot. She fell in love with Kirk and watched Kirk die, and the Kirk that's in the prime timeline that has no knowledge of this, so she can't talk with him about it. Can't talk with anyone about it. Maybe Peli, but who knows if she even remembers everything that happened at this point. But that's like the only one she can talk to. But she does call Kirk just because no one probably see if he has any memory of it. He doesn't. But then, and it sounds like they might meet up at some point in the future. But the thing is the episode ends with her crying because she has a lot to deal with. And because of what the temporal agent told her, she has no support at all. She has nobody to talk to about her experience, nobody to offer her a shoulder to cry on. She's in this by herself. This is not going to be good for Lon's mental health. I have a feeling this is going to be a continuing thread we see in the episode, because who can she talk to? Maybe Peli, because Peli was involved. But Peli didn't know much. Probably just remember two strange people popping in, one looking vaguely like somebody like Lon, and that's probably about it. But that is pretty much the episode. I do very much like what the episode did. I liked how the Romijn temporal agent was only pretending to be conspiracy theorists to help sow division. How everything they were doing was essentially sowing division, trying to prevent the formation of the Federation. And I do like how the episode does address some very hard topics that people like to throw around, and there's, from our perspective, no good answer. But when you really think about things, like if you go changing the past, you can make things worse and not better. The Romijn agent actually had mentioned how they run simulations. Why did that kind of remind me of the for the Year of Hell story arc, 2 episode part in Star Trek Voyager with the Kremlin, I think, Imperium, where there's this one guy who's obsessed with trying to get the timeline just perfect, restore the timeline just perfectly, and there's always one thing never bringing back. This one, so think of that again. In that episode of Voyager, somebody was trying to change the timeline to get it just right in their opinion, but they could never quite manage. And this episode shows that, yeah, you can change the time, you can stop a tyrannical dictator, but that will change history, and that the present day may not be what you want. So, some food for thought there. But that is where I'm going to end this review. I do hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on the episode in the comment section down below. So I have finished watching Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 4, Among the Lotus Eaters. So this episode has 2 main plot lines. The first of which being Captain Pike's relationship with Captain Patel. So, are they just friends? Are they going to be more than friends? All that kind of stuff, his own insecurities about it. And then the other plot line, which is kind of the main plot line of the episode, is that Captain Pike and the landing party have to go to a planet, I believe Joe 7, and recover Federation technology that they accidentally left behind on an away mission from 4 or 5 years ago. And they discover something very interesting on that planet. Actually, a couple interesting things. One member of the landing party actually did survive, because they saw 3 of them were lost, but one of them did survive. And that the planet is a form of radiation that causes basically people to forget those short-term memories. So basically what they had for breakfast, what did they do yesterday. But it doesn't cause them to forget things like language, motor skills, even emotions to a certain extent are not forgotten. So that's the 2 main things of the episode. And those 2 plot lines are very well weaved together. Because, Pike does, on that mission, he does lose all his memories. But because of the gifts that Captain Patel had given to Pike at the beginning of the episode before he, in his own insecurities, broke the relationship off, he still had that gift, which was a pendant form. I forget the exact term. But even with his memories forgotten, he remembered that was a gift given to him by somebody special. So basically at the end of the mission, he realizes that Captain Patel does mean something special to him, and he doesn't want to not have a relationship with her. And they do repair the relationship pretty quickly, I have to say. But probably does help that Pike, apologized for basically, insensitively dealing with his own insecurities about his relationships. That's probably what it is. But going to the main, not necessarily the main plot, the non-Pike specific plot. So one of the characters that they find on the planet is in fact a former, I want to say, ensign who was on that landing party and Pike thought had died but actually survived. Well, he basically figured out how to protect his memories, i.e. there's a certain ore that blocks the radiation, and then he's able to position himself as basically the leader of that community, as I think the term he used High Lord, but basically the king. And then there's another character who's a native of the planet who, he thinks he's fine with forgetting everything every day, but once he actually gains his memories back, because the castle that the Starfleet character Zachariah, or Zach, as Pike calls him, is hiding in with basically all the other residents who are considered the upper class, the elite. And once he's that one character in that castle for a long enough time, his memories return because that radiation is no longer affecting the ability to recall said memories and information and all that. Well, you can tell he's like he doesn't want to deal with a lot of the grief and sorrow that his memories have brought him, has brought back, but at the same time he's glad that he has them again. He had convinced himself that not knowing was better, but once he got them back, he doesn't want to lose them again, which does make some sense. And then over on top of this, on board the Enterprise itself, they're also being affected by this radiation that's causing memory problems. The first case we see is actually Uhura, and I gotta say, why did this make me think of the episode of the original series where Uhura loses all her memories and it's never addressed again? At least in this episode, it's established that these memory losses are short-term memory losses if you can basically block the radiation long enough for your memories to return. But Spock does have a good idea of giving every crew member pads with their name and what they do in case they forget. Because somehow he forgot how to read it. So that didn't work when he lost his memory. But I do wonder if Vulcans might be more susceptible, because one thing we do learn is that memories connected with emotions are stronger than memories not. So with Spock, that would mean, being a Vulcan and does his best to suppress his emotions, he doesn't have as strong of memories in some ways, like things like he's passionate about, for example, he's actually not passionate about really because of being a Vulcan. But that's just a theory on my part. But the helmsman, the pilot of the Enterprise, whose name I need to look up real quick, Anson Mount, when she loses her memory, like, she had no idea, and she, thanks to the computer, is able to find her quarters, and there she starts being able to put, just in that familiar space to her, put herself back together, and realize that, yes, she is the pilot, that she can fly the ship, and she successfully flies the ship out of the debris field, which had, I think, some more the stronger concentration in the radiation, which is why I think the Enterprise crew gets so badly affected so quickly. But Spock was also able to, after all that, and part with the data that the Enterprise sensors collected, able to develop shielding to help block the radiation, and everything is all good at the end of the episode, because not only does on the planet Pike recover all the Federation technology and also Zach for probably trial in the Federation code now, but he also takes the initiative to remove the asteroid that's emitting all that radiation from the planet, so that way the residents of the planet have a chance at developing their society, because you can definitely tell he's thinking, if only the elite can keep their memories, society will never develop if everyone else keeps on forgetting every single day. So there's a debate on, does that violate the Prime Directive? But at the same time, if the majority of the population loses their memories, how can they develop as a culture, as a society? They'll end up just stagnating. But that's just kind of how I would say that, yes, it is okay for Pike to do that. And as established multiple times in this era of Star Trek, Starfleet captains are given a lot more prerogative in breaking the Prime Directive than in later eras of Star Trek. So I have a feeling in this case, it'd be like, okay, you reduce our contamination and you make it possible for them to go as a society. They're probably like, okay, fine. Just don't do it again, and then it's all forgiven and forgotten. They seem to do that a lot in this era of Star Trek. Especially once we get to the original series, and Star Trek Strange New Worlds is definitely approaching the Prime Directive more from the original series standpoint than from a Next Generation series standpoint, which actually does make some sense. It's close in time to the original series, and back then the idea was more of, hey, we don't want to do anything to change your culture. You can do whatever you want, but we're not going to do it. That's more of how they approached it in the original series. Like, we don't want you to change your direction of your culture, but we're not going to necessarily, let you die. While in the Next Generation, every single time somebody intervenes to save a society, it's like, no, and the captain begrudgingly has to do something about it. Yeah, I personally prefer the original series and what seems to be Strange New Worlds interpretation of the Prime Directive a lot more than the Next Generation era interpretation. But these are just my thoughts on it, the thoughts that this episode brought up for me. But overall, I did very much enjoy this episode. I'm not sure which episode so far has been my favorite this season, but we'll figure that out once all the episodes have aired. So I finished watching the newest episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, that being Season 2, Episode 5, Charades. So in this episode, let's just jump right on into the plot summary. And there's so they're investigating basically the ruins of an ancient civilization located in the Vulcan sector, and there's a shuttle accident, and that leads to Spock's Vulcan DNA being removed by the aliens. And I'm pretty sure it's aliens of that civilization that were able to become interdimensional beings. Who knows? That's what everyone's concluding in the episode. And then, of course, during all this, T'Pring's family comes aboard the ship. And so, well, not during all this, but during the same time, because, so, for context, T'Pring is Spock's fiancée, betrothed, whatever term you want to use. Fiancé is probably the more modern equivalent, but basically they're engaged to be married, and an important ceremony dinner needs to occur. And Spock, with this, he does not have his mental control faculties because he is entirely human, which means he's experiencing his emotions, but human type emotions, not Vulcan type, which do require, suppression and all that. But it's very interesting because this gets us to see another side of Spock that we don't see before. Essentially, like, what if Spock actually showed his emotions like he was a human? But at the same time, his emotions are more like that of a teenager, which makes sense. Spock has no experience of emotions before, so he's going to be experiencing them in a different way than other people. It's almost kind of like when Data first got his emotion chip, and started being able to feel emotions. It was the sense of he didn't know how to deal with them, therefore they were stronger than they would normally be. Maybe portray themselves as a bit more intrusive, if you will. But at the same time, there are certain things that show, yes, Spock having these emotions is good for him, but at the same time not. Like, they contrast basically by having a montage with daily activities for him, like socializing and all that, in meetings. Like in the meetings, like when he was under control of emotions with his Vulcan DNA and all that, and basically when he was fully half Vulcan, half human, but you know what I mean. He was able to, okay, so Sam Kirk, has a snack during the meeting and leaves some crumbs. When he's in fully control of his emotions using the Vulcan suppression techniques, and that's capable because he's half Vulcan, he just quietly gets up and removes the plate and the crumbs. But without that, when he's fully human, he has to be held back from attacking Sam Kirk. So that kind of shows the contrast there in a more negative light, but also in a more positive light. When there's a scene, this is not part of the montage, but this still scene, like, when Nurse Chapel is frustrated that she didn't get the fellowship with a Vulcan institute that she was trying to get, Spock was able to comfort her, and in a way that he couldn't have done as a Vulcan. All he could have done as a Vulcan is Vulcans can be insensitive or something like that, or joke. He probably would say insensitive to the needs of humans, something like that. But with having those emotions, he was able to just cut straight to the point, say Vulcans are jokes, and then he gives Nurse Chapel a hug. Now, a big part of Star Trek Strange New Worlds is clear that Nurse Chapel has feelings for Spock. And that's because that was set up straight up in Star Trek TOS, the original series. And one thing we've been wondering is, how is Star Trek Strange New Worlds going to address that, especially as we get closer to the timeline. And because we know Spock is engaged to be married to T'Pring and all that stuff. We know how that's going to turn out, but what are they going to do in the meantime? This episode, they do make the decision. So let's go back to the plot with T'Pring's family. So we get to meet T'Pring's mother, which, can I just say, she's a stereotypical Vulcan, arrogant, very much like the Vulcans of Star Trek Enterprise. Meanwhile, T'Pring's father's like, you can tell he is not stuck up. He's probably more of how we wish Vulcans are, like, ooh. No, like, there's a thing, like, Pike makes some traditional Vulcan dishes, he tries it, ooh, very good. But T'Pring's mother's like, nope, it's not traditional, and he eases off. But you can tell every time, like, he's inquisitive. Yes, you can tell he is still a Vulcan, but he's inquisitive. He's happy to try new experiences, while T'Pring's mother is clearly a traditionalist and very much domineering and exasperating. And actually, there's a moment where Spock was going to tell T'Pring what was going to happen, but in his human emotion, he decided not to burden her with that. And in some ways, that was a good emotional decision, but it was also the wrong decision because him and T'Pring don't have the best relationship to begin with. So by doing that, he harms their relationship. And it does mean at the end of the episode, they take another break. Seems like they're always taking breaks. No wonder she decides she wants to marry someone by the time of the TOS episode. What is it? Well, I can't remember the name, but you know which one I'm talking about. So, we know that's eventually going to happen, and this show is showing us why that happens, because, like, they, in some ways, were never a proper match for each other, mainly because Spock was very dedicated to his duties. But at the same time, while, sure, he probably harmed his relationship with T'Pring during this, it actually strengthened his relationship with his mother, including realizing all that she had to put up through living among Vulcans, living among Vulcans as a human. So it helps kind of, strengthen their relationship. So sure, his relationship with his fiancée has been damaged, but his relationship with his mother has been improved, which I think is a very good thing for them to show us. Additionally, we have a bunch of good comedy scenes where Spock is being trained to act like a Vulcan without the Vulcan DNA to back him up. And there's lots of good humor, but one of the best is where basically Uhura, number one, Lon and Ortegas is basically teaching him how to speak as a Vulcan. He said, and he asks, "Do I really sound like that?" And they all in unison say yes. I thought that was just good humor. Of course, we gotta just talk about the accident and that led to this change in Spock. Well, they encountered those interdimensional beings who changed his DNA because when they crashed, because him and Nurse Chapel were in the shuttle and doing studies and all that on the civilization, doing scans, and the thing is, when they crashed, the alien's like, okay, this person's fully human, this person's not. Well, we'll make the other person fully human. And that alien society does leave basically a calling call. Pike has the whole patch them through, and sure, they try to lodge a complaint, but clearly the one alien that they speak to has, they're fully healthy, and Pike is like, yes, but, and then cuts them off. It's very much we don't make mistakes. If you have a complaint, oh, okay, you're healthy, then nothing else, without realizing the other stuff going on. And so eventually Nurse Chapel, and along with Uhura and Ortegas go back to the rift, able to get inside of it, and Chapel speaks with the aliens, meets another one who's like, this is unusual, and then basically she says, can I speak with the person we spoke with before? And they do that. And one thing, and this is a very important thing because two things happen. One, well, this is kind of off screen, but Nurse Chapel does successfully appeal to get the help she needs in order to get a cure, because everything she was doing was just not working out because there was just something blocking it. There was very complex medical scientific stuff. But the thing is, apparently, you have, in order to lodge a complaint outside the official complaint window, you have to be there has to be a sufficient type of relationship. First of all, wouldn't Nurse Chapel being one of the nurses on the Enterprise that Pike as Spock as a crew member be sufficient? Sure, that's the logical choice, but this is not about logic, it's about emotion, and she has to basically admit to herself that she does have feelings for Spock. She knows it, but she doesn't want to admit it to herself, and her and Ortega's come on, we all know. Clearly everyone on the Enterprise knows that she has a crush on Spock. It's not subtle, it's not hidden, if you will. And she has to admit to the aliens that she wants to have a closer relationship with Spock than just friendship. And that is actually what is able to get her the help she needs and able to get the cure which she gives to Spock before the last part of the ceremony, and that allows him to complete it because hard to fake a mind meld with his own mother. So there was that. But the thing is, Spock was about to admit something to her when she does the injection to administer the cure. Right before, probably what he was going to do was say that he also has feelings for her. And then, of course, then the thing breaks off, and then a little while later, and shortly after that, Chapel visits Spock, and they have a conversation, and Spock, admits that Vulcans do have feelings, and that there's one feeling he doesn't want to suppress anymore, which obviously is that he also has feelings for Chapel, and they start kissing. So that's a direction I did not expect them to take, but I can see why they're doing it, because it makes sense. We know they have a relationship in a way that's different than any other character we see in TOS between the characters. Even him and Kirk, Spock and Kirk, don't have the same kind of things. Let's really talk about the episode. Well, actually, that might have been the episode I was thinking of, but the episode where Spock enters Pon farr. Who's the one who probably is the only one on the ship who truly understands what's going on? Nurse Chapel, because you can tell she's interested in Vulcans. And And like she brings him soup, traditional Vulcan soup, may I add. So it's not like it's a totally foreign. Whatever's going on is not totally foreign to her. She probably knows a lot more about Spock's personal life than nearly everyone else on the ship, just because in TOS by evidence of that. So it would make sense that their relationship would probably deepen at one point, especially since it's clear that Spock and T'Pring don't have that good of a relationship and are in many ways just kind of almost fulfilling family obligations, not really looking after themselves and all this. Like, in some ways you can definitely tell. In Spock and T'Pring's relationship, T'Pring is the one who's most looking after the relationship. So it kind of makes sense why things fall apart when Spock is not really interested in the relationship. You can tell he's much more going through this because it's the proper thing to do, the logical thing to do, not necessarily the emotionally healthy thing to do, which makes sense for Vulcans because Vulcans don't have a good grasp of emotions. Even though they do have them, many of them just don't understand them, and you can definitely tell some Vulcans think they're above emotions and all that. And it does make some sense. Oh, and should we even talk about how the episode's tied to charades? Not only is there a charade hiding the accident from T'Pring's family and with the changes to Spock, but also there is a scene where in order to delay time, Pike says, "Hey, let's do charades," basically, which I thought was kind of funny, but they were also performing a massive charade, and it almost works until Spock reveals it, because basically you can tell he does it in a Vulcan fashion because this is after the cue has been administered, but you can tell he's fed up with T'Pring's mother's basically stuck-up attitude. And I wouldn't be surprised if lots of people in the room, like, finally somebody said it. Because you can definitely tell she's a stuck-up Vulcan, and you can tell, because both the actors for Spock and T'Pring did a very good job of showing the underlying emotions, especially in the Vulcan form, and especially T'Pring's actor. You can tell she's exasperated with her mother, but you can also tell that she's acting like she's not exasperated by acting like somebody who is exasperated but trying to hide it. Like, very, very subtle but very good ways of showing what Vulcan culture is like and how Vulcans do interact with emotions, and how some Vulcans are just much better at dealing with emotions than other Vulcans. And Spock is definitely one of them who's not the best at dealing with his emotions, I gotta say. I really gotta say he's not the best. But that does make sense given everything we know about his character in TOS and the TOS movies. So it is consistent, if you will. It is logical, if you will. So that is just my thoughts on the latest episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Charades. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. So I finished watching the 6th episode of Season 2 of Strange New Worlds, it being entitled Lost in Translation. So this is predominantly an Uhura episode. And like the Uhura episode of Season 1, this was another phenomenal episode. So, I should set the stage for the story, because the heart of the story, of the plot, is Uhura's character story. Sure, there's the overarching plot. The Enterprise joins the Farragut at a deuterium refinery to help repair it and get it up online. Basic stuff in that. But of course, things don't go the way it should be, because one of the stations in bad disrepair, just accidents, including an act of sabotage, and that character is actually hallucinating the same stuff that Uhura is hallucinating and hearing, because Uhura is much later along, and she's because of that character and I think being being a communication officer, more open to other forms of communication, is able to, over the course of the episode, put together that it's actually some kind of alien species trying to communicate with Starfleet about what's going on. Now, this doesn't happen right away, and it's in part thanks to James T. Kirk and also Sam Kirk that we get to figure it out. Because James T. Kirk makes his second appearance in Strange New Worlds Season 2, though this time it's actually the prime timeline cut and not an alternate timeline. But you know what? That's still great. We got to see this interpretation of Kirk, which is just excellent. This is much more TOS style Kirk rather than Kelvin timeline Kirk, but you can see hints of the Kelvin timeline. Probably that makes sense because this is also a slightly younger Kirk. He is only just becoming the first officer of the Farragut, which, by the way, in the alternate timeline episode of that season, Balance and Mercy, Errand and Mercy, regards episode 10 of season 1, guess who was captain of the Farragut? Makes sense, because the Farragut was the ship that Kirk was on before he joined the Enterprise. But that's getting a little sidetracked. So, Kirk basically helps Uhura realize, Uhura is struggling with basically accepting death. And actually, with Kirk's advice about basically confronting and not letting death win, and that she doesn't confront it, she lets death win, that she won't be able to, by that little bit of advice that he gives her, she's able to realize what the aliens are doing, and also a few other things too, and also listening to some recordings of the former chief engineer Hemner walking her through something. Those two things together, she realizes the aliens are trying to communicate with her, and that the singer is overpowering, but but her subconscious, her communication cortex, whatever, is able to put it all is grasping stuff from her mind to try to make sense of it to communicate the message. And once she realizes that, first she actually goes, and this is when we bring in Sam Kirk, who's a xenoanthropologist, so basically a person who studies aliens and that kind of stuff. They're able to piece together what's really going on. Aliens who are probably interdimensional, but attached to the individual deuterium molecules, atoms, are being harmed by the refinery process. So they're able to tell Pike what's going on, and tell him that they have to shut down the refinery. But of course, the refinery, they finally got it up and running, but the problem is they can't shut it down. So it's actually probably a good thing that they decide to destroy it to save the aliens. And that's what they do. They also, of the deuterium that they harvested in this episode on their own ships, they vent as well, just because of the alien life. Strange new worlds, and to explore strange new worlds and seek out new life, new civilizations. That is Star Trek. And another just neat thing that they did with that, I mentioned they had collected some deuterium. We actually get to see the Broussard collectors actually collect deuterium. First time I think we've ever seen that. But of course they didn't end up using it because of the alien life. But this actually reminded me of an episode of TOS where they actually find a silicon-based light from that bunch of miners thought were just rocks. So kind of, I like that little, I don't think that was an intentional parallel, but still, it was a neat little thing. And of course, this is actually the first time we get to see Sam and James Kirk actually interact with each other. And it kind of sounds like Sam has a bit of a chip on his shoulder. James Kirk is the one who's advancing in his career, and is doing everything that their father would want, while Sam only got their father's name, because Sam is his middle name. So it sounds like Sam has maybe a bit of a chip on his shoulder for that, while Kirk is like, hey, you're xenoanthropologist. I may not understand it all, but hey, that's what you do, and I'm proud of you for everything that you've done. Like, Jim is being a good brother about all that. But of course, I do like how Sam's like, says, I'll write a paper on what we've discovered, which makes sense. It's his job being a xenoanthropologist, I'm just saying. But the episode ends with Uhura introducing Kirk to Spock. So this is actually the first time that those two characters meet in the prime timeline. Gotta make sure I specify prime timeline because of what happened a couple episodes ago with the long episode. But I do kind of like it. It's like, it was treated respectfully. It was like sure, it was at the end of the episode signifying its importance, but they didn't linger on it. They just treated it ever so slightly. But one thing to note, when Uhura and Kirk actually met, that was right after, let's see, I'm trying to remember, was it, yeah, Uhura stopped and talked a little bit with Chopper and Spock while they were playing a game of 3D chess, and also talking about their possible relationship. Well, apparently Spock became distracted by that conversation, and sounds like he was within 2 moves of a checkmate according to Kirk, who was observing it all. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but I have a feeling it wasn't necessarily Uhura who distracted Spock. I'm just saying. But it's hard to say as well. But it's very interesting to take a note of. But I did like how they kind of, loosely touched on the plot line from Charades and just let it move on, let it keep it in the background. They did that a lot. It's same thing with, because, because of the long episode of that being tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, Lalonde developed a feelings for an alternate timeline Kirk, and now she's awkward around the real Kirk, which makes no sense. Like, sure, they kept that up, but they didn't make it the focus of the episode. They didn't linger on it at all. They had one scene where they meet up, and Lalonde says his name, and Pike like, you know each other, and Lalonde simply says, long story for another time, and that's it. That's all they do, but it's just enough to hint at, okay, there's still some complicated stuff going on there. She still has a crush on him, but that's not the story of the episode. We don't need to focus on it. And I mentioned those couple of things because all those three things I just mentioned, Spock and Chopper's relationship, Kirk meeting Spock, and of course Lon and Kirk, all that stuff. Sure, they were given a brief moment, but it never lingered. Especially with the Kirk meeting Spock. Sure, that's a big event for us fans, but in timeline, yeah, it was just a meeting of two people. It didn't need to be momentous. Like, I honestly felt the meeting of Kirk and Spock in the Calvert timelines was given maybe too much attention. While here it's like, yep, two officers happen to meet each other. Simple as that, introduced by a mutual acquaintance / friend of them. It makes perfect sense how it was, and I really do enjoy it. There's a few other things I could discuss, such as La'an having the same distance to Peli as Uhura does, both of which because she reminds them of I said his name earlier in the episode, but the previous chief engineer. I want to make sure I get his name right. Yeah, the name has totally blanked on me, but the former chief engineer, both of them are having the same thing. And of course it's addressed with Una and not with Uhura, but Uhura has it addressed more because of her family, which for the story made a little more sense, but the former chief engineer, he was a big part of it, and it's a crazy thing, they got the actor back and dressed him up basically in Andorian / anal zombie makeup. By the end of the episode, once Uhura has successfully communicated the needs of the aliens and that being taken care of, he becomes his normal self. So lots of visual symbolism there, and they really did such a good job on it. Like I said, this was an amazing episode, and I really did enjoy it. They also did a brief mention of the Gome, but again, they didn't dwell on it. All these things that were established in previous episodes, they touched on briefly here, but they didn't make it the focus of the episode, which makes it so good. And one last thing before I ask for your thoughts on this episode. In this episode, Pike is given the promotion to Fleet Captain, because that's what he was dressed at in the cage. And what's actually very neat about that is because if I remember correctly from the cage, Cook says the only time he actually met Pike was shortly after Pike was promoted to Fleet Captain. Again, they didn't dwell on that, they did not make that big deal, they just had Pike and Kirk meet, and that was pretty much it. Sure, they talk of 1-2 other times in the episode, of course, but I do like how they kept that consistent, but they didn't treat it like a big deal. It was just a up and promising new first officer meeting a distinguished captain of Starfleet. That's what they treated it like, and that's what they did, and I really did like that. But that is where I'm going to end this review. I hope to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. So I did not expect this to drop so soon, but we have another episode of Star Trek Lower Decks. Sorry. Star Trek Strange New Worlds. This is a longer awaited crossover episode, and it actually dropped early, though it's taken me about 2 days to get my review out, but that's only because I've been busy. But anyhow, the episode being Season 2, Episode 7, Those Old Scientists. So, the first thing that I think a lot of us might have been wondering is, how are they going to handle a crossover between live action and animation? Those two are very different mediums. And well, I liked how they did it. The episode opened up on board the Cerritos in the Lower Decks animation style. And then our Cerritos crew go down and to basically do a survey of a old artifact that was on the planet that Pike's Enterprise had previously visited as well. And of course, they do get into a little debate on was it Starfleet and Pike Enterprise or was it an Orion scientist who discovered it. And that's actually a common theme they've been talking about a lot in Lower Decks, is not all Orions are pirates. So that comes up, and Tindy insists that the Orions discovered it, not Starfleet. But anyhow, the portal gets activated, and Boimler gets sent to the past to Pike's era, and he lands on the planet, and, well, guess who he gets to see? Pike, Spock, and I believe Lon as well. And his first comment is, "Wow, you look realistic." I'm paraphrasing slightly, but that is actually kind of the message of the episode. The episode very much deals with basically the people that Boimler admires, and eventually Milner comes through the port as well, trying to rescue him. But they basically are dealing with the fact that their heroes, the people they look up to in the past, their major historical figures, are real people, not paragons, not static symbols. People with their own personal lives, with personality quirks that they are not always aware of. Like, literally, there's a point where Boimler thinks he literally broke Spock broke Spock and had changed the timeline. But then he finds out that from this chapter that Spock has been experimenting with his more human emotions from before he even arrived. And so that does put Boimler a bit at ease, but at the same time he's like, does kind of makes him a little bit nervous about the timeline too, because he's only familiar with the stoic Spock, the all-Vulcan acting Spock. And that's the Spock we're mostly familiar with. But let's do remember, there was an episode of Star Trek's the original series, TOS, those old scientists, TOS. Okay, that's a joke from Lower Decks as well, but I did like how they incorporated that into the episode title. But going back, there was an episode where Spock thought Kirk had died, and when he learned that Kirk survived, he showed briefly, but he did show his emotions, publicly. And I'm phrasing that there publicly. Perhaps because there's a later conversation where Boimler and Spock are trying to synthesize the power source of the portal, which is an element that is very rare but was used on early Starfleet ships, including the NX-01 Enterprise that to come in later. But anyhow, they have a conversation about basically based on what later Spock was able to surmise a lot about what the future, but at the same time he does say that I'm not going to let the knowledge of the future impact my course of action, my choices, blah blah blah. But at the same time, it's like there is a difference between probably what Spock shows publicly, probably stays very professional and very very stoic, and maybe what he shows in his personal life. So that's hard to say. Granted, we also do know that, because Lower Decks has shown that clearly that there was mutual feelings between Spock and Chapel, but at the same time, by the time of the original series, they're clearly not in a relationship of any form. So is that because of the actions of Boimler Hill, or is that just something else naturally going on? We don't know. And that's the thing, there's a lot of stuff we don't know about how things are going to develop because we don't know. And Boimler doesn't know a lot of this stuff about Spock's personal life, but that makes sense. Vulcans are in general very secretive about their personal life. Literally. We just don't know a lot. Like even in Star Trek Voyager, it was established that Tuvok and Janeway had a very close friendship, but at the same time, even Janeway did not know what Tuvok's birthday was and had to scour to figure out what it was. So, just another little thing there kind of supporting the idea that Vulcans, especially in public, are very Vulcan, very stoic, but maybe not so much in private. Literally, just look at the episode of this season, Charades, where we see T'Pring's family and her father does not behave like a stereotypical Vulcan, much more inquisitive. Much more accepting of things not being, traditional and stoic all the time. Just some interesting things to take a note of. Though, do have one thing about the episode, but I didn't even address it there because it didn't really bug me too much, so we're not going to talk about it here. But, like that they're just addressing those not just not addressing per se, but it's still addressing, but also introducing the concept that, that Vulcans, perhaps, things they show publicly and privately are going to be different. So that is something to take a note of as well. But one thing to also take a note of, because this is involving time travel, is the other time travel episode of the season, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which saw Lon and an alternate Kirk attempt to restore the timeline back to what Lon was familiar with. And there's a scene where she's going over the rules of what happens when you time travel with Boimo, and she just says don't make personal connections, reflecting on her own experience there. Kind of wish she maybe took an opportunity to talk with Boimo or Milner about it, because they're probably a bit easier to talk about it than everyone else because of the fact that time travels as well, not from her time. But at the same time, temporal investigations never showed up with this time travel. But then again, we do wonder, was it even needed? Because everyone was doing their best around Boimo not to impact the timeline, including Boimo, though he kept on sipping stuff up, releasing things, including when they meet an Orion vessel, which is an Orion science vessel. Going back to the discussion that Tendi and Boimo, Rutherford and Milner were all having beforehand about the portal actually be discovered by Orion scientists, not Starfleet. The Orion scientists have finally shown up, and they're actually all scientists, not pirates, as we find out through the course each time we see them. Scientists and traders mostly. But at the end of the episode, Pike agrees to that the Orions have the credit for the discovery of the portal in exchange for the grain that they had given to them in order to get the portal back. Again, complicated stuff. But see how... And there's a loop going on here. That they're established. Everything that happened this episode always did happen. There is no change in the timeline here. None whatsoever. Which is very interesting to, basically make a note of. The timeline never changed. And literally, when Boimo and Milner make reference to one of Tindy's Orion title, I guess, Mistress of the Winter Sun, I think, Mount, I forget what exactly it is. The captain of the Orion captain of the science vessel recognized the name, and Tindy's great-grandmother was on that vessel. Things have come full circle. So everything they were worried about impacting the timeline, they didn't need to worry about. But at the same time, because they did worry about it, they allowed the timeline to change accordingly. If they just, say, oh, this is a predestination paradox, then I'm not so sure the timeline would have continued the way it was supposed to. And I think that was a little bit of a message to us, the fans, that, hey, timeline continuity, it's going to be all okay. You don't have to worry about it. These characters who you are convinced are in the regular timeline, don't worry. Everything's going the way it's supposed to. That's almost what they're saying here. But I mentioned Milner also comes into the past as well, interacts with her hero of Uhura and all that, but also not realizing at this stage in her life she was much more of a workaholic than she would be later in her life, which does make sense. But it also further establishes that she is a skilled officer. Because let's be real, most of the time in the original series, she was literally just that ship's not answering hails, captains. Kind of minor stuff. She wasn't given a lot to do, unfortunately, in the original series. And they did have the scene in Star Trek 6 where, sure, she's translating Klingon but having difficulties. I do like how they'll re-establish that. No, she's very skilled at that. Hopefully they retcon that scene later just to be a very obscure dialect that she had to look up the specific words for because she was not familiar with that one dialect of Klingon. Much more realistic given everything that's established. But there's a lot of good referential humor here too to the oddly specific references that Lower Decks employs. We generally don't talk in real life and also in most other Star Trek shows with the hyper-specific references. That's not super common. Sure, it can happen, especially among nerd and geek groups. It can happen in those hyper-focused communities when especially when they're talking about the subjects they adore, but it's not going to happen all the time. So I do like they referenced it, but at the same time, they did tone it down, I think, from a little bit from Lower Decks, but also by having it established as something that the Pike's Enterprise crew is picking up on, they established that this is something that maybe is not normal. I'm speculating that it's not normal for the flagships. Those crews maybe tend to act a little more professional, so drop a lot of references. But navies like Starfleet is basically a space navy, are highly focused on tradition. So it wouldn't surprise me if, off the flagships, off these major ships, maybe things do get a little more referential to the history of Starfleet's past. I mean, it's basically like in-jokes. There's many groups that will have in-jokes that only them understand. Us, the audience, are clued into that stuff in the sense in Star Trek for Starfleet because we are watching their adventures. But if we wouldn't, would we know? I've heard stories where there are in-jokes that only Marines know, but Army soldiers or Navy sailors do not know that in-joke whatsoever. And maybe that's something that we're seeing here. The in-jokes of the Cerritos are not the same in-jokes that Pike's Enterprise are familiar with. But at the same time, they have their own things they are familiar with, their own historical figures they look up to. Like I mentioned, that the time portal, well, it's of Nausicaan origin, which surprised us, but maybe Nausicaan civilization has gone under a lot of changes over the years, given how we see them now. Maybe it's not how they always were. But it requires a fairly volatile alloy to operate, which was used in hulls of the NX-01 Enterprise and other NX-class starships. And of course, okay, they didn't go steal a piece of the Enterprise. Probably good, because they actually saw the Enterprise in the Broken Circle. But on board Pike's Enterprise is a piece of the NX-01, which is actually a real tradition where ships of the same namesake will be built with a component with a piece of the previous ship. With the previous ship. I don't know why I was having so much trouble saying that word there. But they reference a real naval tradition there, and they also got a chance to see Pike's Enterprise characters geek out about past. Now, talking about the NX-01, you have Ortega's talking about Charades, and her talking about Hoshi Sato, like referencing the people they admire in the past, just like they are admired by people in the future. And they literally make a reference, are we sounding like them? And Spock says, yes, you are, and it's exhausting. Which is also very much a Spock thing to do, but a younger Spock thing to do too, as well, because he's not the fully stoic Vulcan yet that we know him to be, or know him to be in public. I'm still maintaining there could be a difference between public and private. But that, though, very much does establish something that goes back to the beginning of the episode when Boimler first appears, where he mentions they're so realistic. They're realistic because they are real people. They're not cartoons, they're not paragons of virtue, they're not static symbols. They are real people with personalities, character flaws, character quirks, all that stuff. Stuff that's not always incorporated into the historical record. Like literally, it's revealed that Una is the literal poster child of Starfleet, with Ad Astra per Aspera in her picture being on the recruitment poster for Starfleet, as revealed in this episode. Though, at first she thinks it's a pinup poster, not a recruitment poster. But knowing Boimler, and knowing Mariner makes sense that she leaves that part out at first. But it's like, yeah, it does make sense. It also shows that Mariner is very well versed in Starfleet regulations, but she generally prefers the ones that allow her to slack off. But which she uses to force her to take a break, which leads to one introducing them to Orion beverage, alcoholic drink that she makes with a substitute, but they later drink with actual Orion drink because of everything going on with the Orion scientists, which is actually how we end the episode with animated Strange New Worlds characters, and they notice the difference and think they're drunk, which is a hilarious way of doing that, but they're all connected though. But that's how they figure out it was Nausicaan, because by talking with the symbols shown to Ortega's, which he recognizes from a dumb judge set that was a very old Nausicaan set. Like, would that have happened if Mariner never used Starfleet regulations to get her to take a break, but not really take a break. See what I'm saying? Those little things there shows us a lot about the characters, both in Strange New Worlds, but also in Lower Decks, and shows them being real people who maybe suffer from working too much and do need to take more of a break. And should we even talk about the main thing with Pike? So Pike basically is not being Pike, but there's a moment where Boimler reveals that Pike's birthday is coming up, that it's a major holiday in the future. They don't address that too much, but it does make sense given everything we know about Pike. The fact that they actually make also a medal named after him as well in the future Starfleet. But there's a scene basically after Boimler and Milner attempt to steal a shuttle. Basically, and they're caught by Lon. Like, yep, definitely don't mess with them. With Lon, she's a very good security officer. But Pike literally also, after that, dresses him down, but also tells him, I hear you getting the crew to plan me a surprise party. Please don't. And then they're trying because they know what's going to happen to him just like he knows, but they don't know that he knows his fate. Well, I don't know if he knows about what's going to happen when Spock steals the Enterprise to bring him back to the planet from in the episode The Cage. Was it the Menagerie? No, The Cage was... Okay, I'm getting the two episodes mixed up, but that's not the point. From the original pilot, and the only two part in the original series. Like, he may not know that, but he does know about the accident and him being confined to a wheelchair. But that might be all Milner and Boimler know as well, but regardless, they're kind of dancing around the issue like, well, what if something happens and you don't get to spend time with the people who care about you, blah, blah, blah. And and he basically says, I know what's going on, and they can't pick up well, he knows. And so that kind of surprises them a little bit, but at the same time, he kind of reflects from that by saying, that birthday for him he was going to be 1 year older than his father was when his father passed, and he never got a chance to repair the relationship with his father, which I believe is actually echoing a little bit with Kirk and his father in the Kelvin timeline. But we're not talking about the Kelvin timeline, we're talking about this episode. But the thing to really take a note of here is basically he does allow that birthday party to continue and cancels the opportunity he was going to take, basically a fishing trip where he was just going to drink some whiskey and toast to his father, which, he can do anytime, but at the same time, it's maybe he should let his crew celebrate him. They admire him. They appreciate him after all. And that's how we also get an animated scene in the Orion beverage that makes them notice they're being animated and think it's them being drunk. I did like that. That was a good little joke there. But yeah, I think I covered all the major plot points of this episode, but I'll say this one last time in summary. This episode very much, sure, it's a fun romp with lots of good reference humor, but I think it's really saying a lot about the nature of our heroes. That line from Boimler where he commented on them being realistic, i.e. not being animated in the self-referential humor of Lower Decks, but also in the sense of the real people. Sure, he doesn't realize that when he says it, but that is literally what he learns. The real people, they're not basically static images that he associates with them. A lot of times, we put in real life historical figures on pedestals. We also put fictional characters on pedestals, but for this metaphor to work, Pike's Enterprise are all historical figures to the people of the crew of Lower Decks. It makes sense. That those are historical figures. They know their accomplishments. They know what they look like. They know some of the personality, but how well do they really know them as people who have their faults, who have their quirks? Probably not so well. And that's what they learn. Real life. We put so many people in history on a pedestal. Let's just take presidents in the United States. Very easy to talk about because there's so many of them. And so many things we don't do and do not know about them. But Reagan is still on a pedestal for many, many people. He's viewed as one of the greatest presidents of all time. Yet, peel the layer back and realize he's not a perfect individual. He has his problems, especially when it came to race relations. He didn't necessarily handle some things the best, and did institutions and policies that more negatively impacted the African American community, such as the war on drugs, than it did the white community. He doesn't have an unblemished image. He has problems. or let's take, a president so many Americans despise, especially those who agree that the South should not have seceded and should not have fought to preserve slavery. James Buchanan, he did nothing to prevent the Civil War. Granted, what was there for him to do? We gotta acknowledge that. But many people think he might have been our first gay president. We don't know that for sure because, one, terminology changes, and two, there's no good historical record supporting it anyway besides the fact that he never married. And a few other odd things there, but nothing conclusive. If we had a time machine and went back, would some of our popular perceptions of, or just individual perceptions of James Buchanan change? Or Lincoln? There's a big debate on Lincoln in regarding what he actually saw about things like equal rights. Sure, he definitely was anti-slavery, but there are some things where, there's, I think, the Greeley letter, where Lincoln says that he is favor of the superior position being assigned to the white race. Nowadays, we're yeah, that's white supremacy, but at the same time, back then, was that just political pandering? Where did he actually stand? We know what was said publicly, what was released, but what did he think personally? That's something, especially with politicians, we sometimes don't have the evidence to firmly say what they actually thought. Sometimes we do know because they kept good records or wrote their memoirs and diaries, but sometimes how we interpret people, sometimes it is a reflection of what we think they were like, not what they actually were like. And that is definitely something that Boimler learns in this episode, and something I think we need to be familiar with ourselves, because there are many historical figures we both admire and hate, but what do we actually know about them? We know their accomplishments, we know what's public about them, but how much do we know about them as people? And this episode was basically about showcasing, hey, these characters, they're all people, they're all realistic people. Sure, I should acknowledge that this is still a fictional story and therefore they're not truly realistic, but the analogy is still there. In universe, these are real people, not historical figures. Oh, they are historical figures, but they're real people, not static historical figures who are never changing. We do that a lot with historical figures. I mean, how often when we talk about George Washington's experience in the French and Indian War, we always are projecting the image we have of him of the Revolutionary War. So yeah, this episode really does address the concept of historical figures and them being real people, not static symbols. But that's just my thoughts on this episode. I would love to hear yours in the comment section down below. There is so much more I can discuss, but I'm going to leave that here and we'll use the comment section to continue the discussion. So I finished watching the 8th episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, that being the episode Under the Cloak of War. So this is actually an interesting episode because it might actually be the darkest episode of Strange New Worlds so far, but the main plot of the episode revolves about the Enterprise playing host to a Klingon defector who is now an ambassador for the Federation. So in many ways, it kind of reminds me a little bit of future developments between Klingon Federation relations, but at the same time, there's that undertone of the current hostilities, especially among those who lived through the Klingon Federation war that was mentioned, that occurred in Star Trek Discovery, I think it was. But regardless, dealing with lots of the people's complicated things and how war never really leaves them, and how only those who experience similar stuff as them can deal with it. So basically there's a lot of hostilities to the Klingon ambassador, who's not only considered basically he's basically considered that he killed a bunch of Federation citizens as a general, but then he also killed his own men. Of course, as we find out later, he didn't kill them, but I do wonder, did he think himself still responsible for their deaths? Because this is getting into spoilers, but it was actually Dr. Mbenga who killed those Klingons that the ambassador took credit for. But at the same time, I do wonder, in his own Klingon way, did he feel responsible that he was a coward and he ran while they covered his retreat, and maybe he felt responsible that way? That would have been very neat if they explored, but they didn't. That's because this episode was more exploring about the effects of war on the main character I was saying this was Dr. Mbenga, but a little bit also on Chapel, and a tiny little bit on Ortegas, being those three main characters altogether who served during the Klingon Federation War and experienced combat, or experienced warlike conditions, because Mbenga and Chapel were both assigned to basically a field hospital. And I gotta say, it's kind of funny, not funny in the ironic sense. Nurse Chapel arrives there, and she finds out she's now the head nurse because she has the most experience of everyone there, and she just arrived. Crazy. But I got a little bit with that stuff of MASH vibes, not too much. Definitely some of the more darker episodes that really drove more into war and combat and death and all that. A little bit more, not as much, but a little bit, just that hint of it, and it makes me want... I would love a Star Trek medical show that deals with more complicated stuff. And maybe, yes, set it during conflict, that's okay. MASH did it, it's proven successful, and outside of combat also, or outside of, battles and that, the medical shows also work. But regardless, it gave me a little bit of touch. You got triage, you gotta make tough choices on who to save, who not to save. You have a constant threat of enemy attack. Like, there is some similarities there. Probably a lot of surface level, but some. Living in tents even, like, just ever so in dealing with triage, like, those just minor little stuff there just created the atmosphere for me. But of course, the main point of this episode was really showing that with those three characters, especially Mbenga, what they did, what they experienced during the war never left them and still affects them to this day. And honestly, I feel like there's parts of the episode that's still lingering, stuff that still needs to be said, but at the same time, maybe that's the point. There's so much about the experience of war that people like me who have only experienced it through the realm of video games and history textbooks, which do not do it justice. That much I do know. So maybe that's lacking something, like even someone who has studied war maybe a bit more than the average person, being a history buff and all that. Sure, I know a little bit, but I do know there's a lot of the experience that I've never experienced. So perhaps by having that little bit lacking is their attempt to explain to us, the audience, that there is something about war that you can just never properly explain away. I don't know, but those are kind of just my general thoughts on this episode. I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Oh, should I also even mention what happened at the end of the episode? I don't know, because I think I'm going to leave it broad, because I already talked about what I really want to talk about, and that being the message of this episode, what this episode I think is trying to say about war and its effect on people. But that is what I'm going to leave you today, so thank you for watching. So I just finished watching the 9th episode and also second to last episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, the episode being Subspace Rhapsody, and this is a musical. So, when the idea of a Star Trek musical, when I heard that this episode, I was like, oh, interesting, could be very interesting, though unexpected. Mainly because I would expected something more like Lower Decks to have a musical episode before one of the live action shows. Just seems to fit their vibe a little better. But I correctly predicted that there was going to be some kind of, weird anomaly that causes them to break out in singing. It was basically, just to cut it short, they were studying a fold in Subspace, and they were trying to use it to improve communications. They sent a song through, and that's what started it. So it makes me wonder if they set obviously by sending regular communicative text, nothing happened, but what if they set something else through? But the song was specifically, I think, an old show tune, like that you would have heard in a musical. And that's, I think, why, like, say if they sent an opera song through, would their singing be different because of that? Because basically the episode literally follows musical rules. They literally call it out. They get meta on it, how they start singing when, basically in heightened emotion, all that, they essentially got meta about the narrative through the realm of music and musicals, which I thought was pretty hilarious. But so a lot of character development did get advanced in this episode. A fair amount. So Laurent's crush on Kirk is resolved. Basically, nothing's going forward there, but that does make sense after all. And also, I think, like, she literally has a solo, and you can tell the song is not just about her crush on Kirk, just about her not letting anyone into her life in any sense, being kind of emotionally closed off to other people, which, doesn't make sense. I'm building off of that we've seen this is something she struggled with. She's not really close to anyone, seems like her best friend is Una. So yeah, she definitely could delve into making some more friendships and that. And so maybe this is going to be the start of that for her. There's also, dealing with the plot and between Spock and Nurse Chapel. And basically, Chapel has accepted for another fellowship that's going to take her off the Enterprise. But she doesn't tell Spock right away. Though, at the same time, probably she would have told him in her own way. But in order to, because when Spock and Uhura were investigating what's going on, trying to figure out, okay, what is going on? How can we stop this? They figure out what's causing it, but they don't have the data to solve it. So, the door to the ship's spot opens up when they walk past, and Uhura has, okay, we'll find out. So Uhura basically prompts that between Nurse Chapel and Spock. And you can actually tell after that song, Spock is a little more distant with Nurse Chapel, but he also has a whole song where he sings about his own feelings, but in very much a Vulcan way, which is actually quite impressive, but it does kind of make sense. Yes, he has emotions, but he's still going to interpret them as logically as possible, so even if it's an emotional thing, it'll be if this, then that kind of deal, and that's kind of almost the way he looks at it, which is actually kind of a logical way of looking at emotions when you think about it, which does explain, I think, a little bit more what we see later, where he doesn't show his emotions, but we know he has them. But yeah, there's other things here and there too. Could even mention Cook, as I alluded to, is in the episode, and he does some singing as well, but not as much. But we do get a call out to Carol Marcus and that she's pregnant with their son, which we know because the Raffican is going to be David Marcus. So that little drop there, not much, but also explains why Lon and Kirk don't pursue a relationship at this point, and probably won't. But it's kind of nice to, what this does is show more about Kirk's character at this stage in his life as well. He's not the Kirk of the TOS yet. He's not that Kirk quite yet, which makes sense. He's still a fairly young officer. He's literally shadowing Lon in this episode to learn more about commanding. So it kind of, builds up strong that this is not quite the Kirk we're familiar with yet. He still has some growing to do, which makes perfect sense. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. I could talk about every musical number, but I've talked about, I think, the important ones besides Uhura's solo number, and that's essentially when she figures out what they need to do, meaning they need to basically get everyone on board the ship singing in order to overwhelm the subspace anomaly field, wherever, in order to get it to collapse in on itself. And of course, her song is very much about her being alone, but not being alone, because she connects everyone together as a communications officer. Very meta in that regard, but I would say probably the song that was the most meta about describing what they do is probably the first song, where they literally sing about their status report, which is just hilarious. But, so, as I was alluding to though, with Uhura's solo, she figures out they basically need to do a grand finale, and like I said, to overload. And so, she gets everyone to start singing, and so lots of things, close, Chapel admits that she'll miss everyone on the Enterprise, which makes sense, because she does eventually come back to the Enterprise. There's so much to break down, though. I'm not even talking about this from a musical series standpoint, because I cannot, but I'm just talking about more from a storytelling standpoint. There is a lot to break down, and I do hope they explore it more in the future, the plot points they bring up. Granted, there's only one episode left, but there's always season 3 too. But I do also hope there are people out there who will break down these songs and what the songs are trying to say in their music. But yeah, the grand finale is amazing. Really, everyone's singing. There's even some dancing. But they even hear the Klingons, and the Klingons start singing. Now, this is actually, I think, a very interesting thing. Earlier in the episode, basically the Klingons sent a message that they're going to destroy the sources of dishonor. Granted, we know Klingons do like to sing on board their ships, and Klingon operas are apparently very popular, and it's often mentioned songs of the deeds of great warriors and all that. There's lots of references to that, so we know Klingons are not opposed to singing. But then we saw how they were singing during the grand finale when the Enterprise hails them. It's not any kind of thing we would expect out of Klingons. It's very... I think I'm not the best identifier of music genres, but it might have been something like rap or K-pop. I'm not quite sure, but I think that is why the Klingons were decided. It was the style of music. Because let's remember, this all started on board a predominantly human starship of Starfleet. And the music choice was more of a show tune, a musical tune that started it all. So the Klingons are seen as different from the Federation, from the standpoint of the Federation. So I think in the terms of the narrative, the probability that's causing on this, because of that subspace field anomaly, wherever, that they would be singing in a way that would not necessarily actually be reflective of their musical culture, their way of telling stories through song, but would be reflective of a more human way. So the musical style is very much Western. So what's not a Western musical genre that people still sing and tell stories in? That is, I think, how they were going through here. So if the Klingons were like singing their equivalent of sea shanties or Klingon operas or just of their great deeds in battle, then sure, they would probably be fine with it. But it was how they were singing, and probably was singing in such a way that wasn't a part of the Klingon culture. And because you can definitely tell, when they were done singing that one really brief scene, they looked at each other like, what did we just do? So, I got the feeling that this is not a musical genre they sing. This is not a Klingon musical genre. And that is why they were calling it dishonor, because they were being forced to sing, but it wasn't just being forced to sing, it was being forced to sing in a genre that wasn't of their culture. I think that might have been what it was getting at there. The Klingons are dishonored when they sing in the non-Klingon culture, which is actually a very Klingon thing, especially Klingons on this time frame. But yeah, it is just hilarious how that was. But I do think it says something very interesting about Klingons. Yes, other sources in canon, like I said, have established that Klingons do sing and have their own musical genres. But they didn't sing in their musical genre. Now, maybe they were trying to introduce a new genre of Klingon music, but I don't think so. The body language and facial expressions of the Klingons before and while and after they were singing, and also the fact they were going to destroy the anomaly, kind of does tell me that they don't mind that this singing was dishonorable to them. Which it will also make sense. Also, maybe if one Klingon started singing about his cowardice, that also would be seen as dishonorable too. So, I'm not a coward. This whatever anomaly is making me do that. We gotta go destroy it. I got to see that being done too, because Klingons like singing about their honor, their strength, their glory, not necessarily about their cowardice. Sure, you got I'm just gonna mention Deep Space Nine with Martok when they were all in that Martok, Worf, Bashir and Garrick and a few others were in that Jem'Hadar Dominion prison. There was not too many others. But the crazy thing I kind of think in that is, not crazy thing, but Martok mentions, he will write a song telling of basic Worf's deeds, and then also talks about Dr. Bashir bandaging the Worf. It would be a verse in the song. Of course, Garrick makes this line at a point. He says that a line or a verse about the Cardassian who basically was unable to help them get out because the claustrophobia would ruin the general song. That, combined with that and plus what we see here, it definitely tells me that Klingons don't like singing about cowardice and shooking from responsibility, if you will. And I'm thinking, perhaps we didn't see it on screen, but they're singing not in their genre, not in their style, and not of a story that they like. A story that maybe a song that highlights their cowardice or their failings. That is something Klingons would not tolerate and would consider dishonorable. Just some food for thought right there. I probably spoke more about that in terms of in-depth from that one little bit of Klingon singing, but I think it really does say a lot about Klingon culture, and perhaps it gives us an insight that we haven't really seen before in Klingon culture. But yeah, they do eventually successfully stop singing and all that. Of course, the whole is still humming it at the end, and she says it's just an earworm. And it is an earworm. It's actually, there was, I think, only one song with the melody reprised, I think. But yeah, there was a lot of great stuff, but like I said earlier, I'm actually surprised Strange New Worlds did a musical episode before Lower Decks. I'm just honestly surprised at that. But I will say, this is not the first time there's been music in Star Trek. We had the horror singing in an episode of the original series, and there's been other elements of singing, like we had Vic Fontaine singing in Deep Space Nine, the Doctor occasionally sang in Voyager, but those episodes were never musicals. You had times when one of those characters who did sing would sing in such a way that would help that would advance the story or just to show some downtime. But you never really had before music being a part of the main story throughout the entire episode. The closest might be one of the Vic Fontaine episodes, but even of Deep Space Nine, but even then, not quite. This was truly a true musical episode with spontaneous singing by non-singers, people who don't sing for a living or enjoy singing and sing whenever they get a chance. None of our characters are known for singing, so this is an actual musical number and a musical episode. But yeah, I think I'm getting a bit too much into the meta of all this. But yeah, I'm going to leave you guys with my concluding thoughts. I thought this was a pretty good episode. I will admit, not all the songs hit that well musically. I'm not the best, but I know when I like a song and when I don't like a song. But I do think a lot of it does have to do is, I don't think a lot of these actors are professional singers, because some of the times, like, I thought the music is kind of loud, I can't hear the voice, and I think that might have been intentional, especially if they were using auto-tune to deal with some of the non-singers' lack of singing ability. Now, that doesn't mean, now some of them you can definitely tell can sing, but not all of them. But yeah, this was definitely an experiment, and I think it turned out pretty well. It gave us a unique way of exploring our characters and even exploring the Star Trek universe, but mostly our characters. But that concludes my review. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. So I finished watching the 10th and final episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. So episode 10 is titled Hegemony, and it is a phenomenal season finale. I do think I like the season finale of season 1 a bit better, but that's only because season 1's finale, well, spoiler alert, is not a two-parter. This episode ends with a to-be continued, a cliffhanger. I think I'm finally going to understand what a lot of Star Trek fans, after watching the Best of Both Worlds for TNG, actually felt having to wait for the conclusion in the next season. But yeah, I do think overall it was a good, strong season finale. Sets up a lot of stuff. In fact, let's just go ahead and talk spoilers. They're gone. And I think something that they're setting up very much is the Federation is missing the obvious with Gorn. They're seeing them simply as monsters, not realizing their intelligence. Now, I think Starfleet, especially Pike, and a few other characters, they are realizing there is something they're missing, but they don't know what they're missing. I think that missing link is how to communicate with the Gorn, how to figure out what the Gorn are all about. So that's something to take a note of. I think that's what they're showing us, is how, because otherwise it could ruin the payoff of Arena in Star Trek the original series. It looks like they're trying to still keep that relatively intact. That's when Starfleet and the Gorn are finally able to communicate with each other in some way, to begin the process of coming to an understanding and avoiding conflict. So perhaps this is, setting this up. Now, setting that stuff up maybe in the best way possible by showing, hostility after hostility, but also showing Starfleet is ever so slightly just missing that key piece of the puzzle. Now, they'll figure out things about the Gorn biologically, but not anything societally. And that's something interesting to take a note of. Of course, that's just the general premise of the episode. There's a lot going on in the episode. We get action, we get horror, we get suspense, we get new characters. That's right, we get the old classic from the original series, Scotty. Of course, he's only a lieutenant junior grade. And I loved how they have him say lieutenant, just like, people from the UK generally actually do. And there's probably a few who, when working with Americans, probably do say lieutenant. But come on, you watch any World War II film, whether it's a documentary or fiction, doesn't matter, anything set in World War II. Yep, the Brits are all saying lieutenant. And I just love how, cause Scotty, well, he's Scottish, so he's from the UK, so of course he'd be saying lieutenant. But it was so great. And I feel like they did a very good job of showing a younger Scotty. You can tell he's an engineering genius, but you can tell he doesn't have, I'm going to say, the confidence he does later, which makes some sense. But this is kind of a little bit, not too much of a spoiler, but at the end of the episode, he's beamed aboard the Enterprise, so his first time aboard the Enterprise. And the current chief engineer, Patty, guess what? Was his former professor. And apparently he was her best student who got the worst grades. So that implies she could tell he was smart, he was intelligent, he knew what he was doing, but didn't do the homework. That's literally what it sounded like. Didn't actually do the tests. That is what it sounded like to me, which I think is just hilarious. But it does make me wonder, in season 3, are we going to get them teaming up, get some stories? Because I think there could be some good opportunity for comedy there. I do think so. But that's kind of sidetracked from the main story of the episode, which probably should give a general plot summary. Oh, one more thing about Scotty. When the Gorn invade the planet, arrive at the planet, there's a shuttle. That's Scotty's shuttle, but I did not pick that up on at first, because I didn't even know Scotty was there. It was actually only me preparing to make my review that it dawned on me that the shuttle we saw at the start of the Gorn invasion of this planet was Scotty's shuttle when he was evacuating the system where he was at, which I think is kind of interesting. But yeah, so Captain Patel, so that's basically Pike's girlfriend, and so she's on a mission, basically helping in colony, get some vaccinations. Nurse Chapels is helping, kind of looks like she's, jumping, going on a couple of ships until she gets to her destination with her fellowship. That's what I was looking for. Of course, a fellowship with a certain somebody that we later see in the original series episode. But yeah, though I lost my train of thought there, so let me recenter and begin, not over again, but I'm just delaying my thought process talking. Well, I don't know what I'm doing right now, but going back to the actual episode. So she beams back aboard the ship, which is the Cayuga, and that's when the Gorn attack. And thankfully, we do find out they're all survivors. The Cayuga does send out distressing go, which the Enterprise does receive and does go to investigate and extract survivors as they can. And unfortunately, though, the Gorn send in transmission to Starfleet with a demarcation line. Of course, given planetary motion, I wonder if that demarcation line that we saw was only at that present point, if they included coordinates, and that should just align as things orbited. I don't know, but it would be interesting, because that would be another piece of the puzzle. Or maybe they're going to figure, okay, we don't need this demarcation line in such amount of time, so we'll only do what we need right now, which could contribute to Starfleet missing the obvious in front of them about the Gorn being intelligent. But still, the Gorn only communicated with basically a map and a line drawn with Starfleet. Nothing else yet. So, things are going on. But there's also the Gorn display interesting behavior on the planet. From the last major Gorn episode in season 1, it was basically revealed that the Gorn Young fight each other. The Gorn Young are not fighting each other this time, which is interesting. Now, could it be the environment, or could it be something else? Maybe the Gorn found a way to suppress the Young's more violent instinct. because definitely doesn't indicate the Gon young are more violent, more monstrous than the Gon adults are, who are much more tactical, intelligent. It's interesting to take a note of, and I do find this interesting, and I hope we see more of how this develops and how Starfleet misses it. But yeah, Pike, Ortegas, Mbenga, and Lon, and Sam Kirk all go down the planet. So we know for sure, because of who appears in the original series, that Sam Kirk and Pike will come out of this mission, okay? But I gotta say, I love it whenever they put Sam Kirk in danger. Not only because we know he's gonna be fine, but it's because, like, okay, how are they gonna put him in danger again? Hasn't happened as often as I would like, but I love it every time they do it. But yeah, so they go down to the planet. They detect human life signs, and they stumble into a trap for the Gon set by Scotty, which is our first introduction to him. And I already talked about his introduction when he's saying lieutenant and all that, but he is so good. He, I think, like I said earlier, embodies a young Scotty. I forget the name of the actor, but I think captures a younger Scotty who's not as confident, still confident in his abilities, but not necessarily as confident in his, I'm going to say, his presentation, his interactions with others, more of a, almost you can say he hasn't developed the leadership skills he needs to be a chief engineer yet. And maybe that's what we'll see in season 3, working with Peli. But that's only speculation, and I kind of touched on that already. So Captain Patel is alive along with several other colonists as well. But we discovered that Scotty had developed basically a piece of tech that to mask their human life signs and make the Gon think they're gone. So they go back to his shelter to see if they could recover that tech so they can use it to escape. Of course, we do find out there that Patel has been infected with Gon eggs, and she's willing to use Pike's shelter in that piece of tech as a jamming device in a suicide mission to destroy the tower that's jamming all the sensors. Of course, meanwhile on the Enterprise, they have their own plan to stop the jamming, which Uhura figures out. Of course, makes sense. She's a communication officer, so exploring frequencies. She figures out the cause of it. Of course, she needs to destroy it, and, well, she's not an engineer or a tactician, so she goes to Peli for the engineering side of things. Of course, and Spock is doing stuff as well, but he's not doing as much. But it does make sense. It's a younger Spock that hasn't controlled his emotions, and him and Chapel did depart not on the best terms in the last episode, and we get a sense that he's not saying he's feeling guilty, but he's acting like he's feeling guilty, like maybe there's something he could have done better. Of course, there's not much I say he could have done, but that doesn't stop his feelings. He is half human, and Vulcans do have emotions as well. They just hide it very well, generally. But I know, what's what I'm looking for? I know Chopper's gonna be fine because of the original series, and she is fine. Granted, it's kind of lucky that she's the only survivor, but they were going on the ship, so the Gon probably were hunting down survivors on board the Cayuga, but she does manage to escape, find a spacesuit, which was convenient in her location. But my theory is spacesuits like that are scattered around Starfleet ships for this exact reason. I mean, it seems like something Starfleet would do, as Chief O'Brien said in an episode of Deep Space Nine. Well, you want a backup for a backup, something to that effect. So I think it would be well within Starfleet's modus operandi to have spacesuits scattered around their starships, so in case things like this happen where suctions are gone, life support's failing, you still have a spacesuit nearby, even if you didn't get to an escape pod. I do think that's the most realistic answer. But of course, I got distracted a little bit there, but she does find Spock, because Spock is going to the Cayuga because they're placing rockets so they can use the Cayuga's destroyed saucer section to destroy the Gon sensor so they can beam everyone up. So it's quite lucky that they found each other. And I say they both save each other, mainly because Chapel helps Spock get the drop on one of the Gon aboard that have boarded the Cayuga, which I'm saying the Gon were trying to access the logs, the database of the Cayuga, because one was trying to input the command codes and kept on failing. Intelligence gathering. The Gon are much more interesting than what Starfleet is realizing. But they're not aware of it because of how monstrous the Gorn are acting, especially the younger Gorn in the presence of Starfleet officers. But, so you can kind of see how all this is building up to the climax of the episode and also to TOS the arena. But another thing I would like to kind of make a note of is Spock says that he's the only one who can do it. And the reason why I think he said that is because being a Vulcan, he's probably the only one who has maybe enough patience, but also at the same time enough control to successfully place the rockets in the exact position they need without the assistance of sensors and all that because of the jamming field. That's, I think, what's going on there, which in my opinion does make sense. And I gotta say, the Enterprise's plan works and they're able to contact Pike and beam him, Batel, and Scotty up to the Enterprise directly to sickbay. And thankfully, because of the choppers there, now they have a very experienced and competent medical professional that we know of. We don't know about all the other medical staff on the Enterprise, unfortunately. And she sedates Patel and puts her in a confinement area so in case anything happens. Of course, Patel is willing to sacrifice herself to save Starfleet and the Enterprise from the golden egg that had been implanted into her arm. So, we know what could happen to her, but will it? I don't know, but everyone's beamed off. Unfortunately, as we find out later, the colonists, Lon, and Benga, and Sam Kirk, and Ortegas were beamed aboard the golden ship, not the Enterprise. I thought something was off when I saw the transporter beam. Didn't look quite Starfleet. Now, what's going to happen in the next episode, I don't know, but the Enterprise has orders to withdraw, and Pike is freezing. But that does make sense. Pike has never really been portrayed that much as a tactician, more as a diplomat, more like Jean-Luc Picard than Kirk. Of course, maybe that's what they need. Maybe they do need Kirk to come up and save the day. But I will say this. There's all going on in that scene, so of course he's going to be overwhelmed, and sure, he's a Starfleet officer, but, I mean, he's more the diplomat and the scientist, not the warrior and all that. But it does add some layers, showing that Starfleet is not purely a military organization. That when you put a great Starfleet captain, but who's not a military officer, yes, who can generally hold his own in skirmishes with pirates and other situations, but not a actual tactician. I mean, you can see why in many episodes he does ask for the advice of his crew when it comes to tactical situations. And his tactical officer is not there right now. The one with the most experience fighting the Gorn, who's now aboard the Gorn ship. Great. Lon has a lot more trauma under her belt. Man, Lon's been getting a lot of trauma. First she falls in love with an alternate cook, then that alternate cook dies, and she can't talk about it anymore because of the temporal time directive. Then she finally confesses her feelings to her timeline's cook, who is involved with Kira Marcus and thus is unable to pursue a relationship with her, and now she's captured by the Gorn again. How much more trauma can Lon experience? And then, of course, we have Ortegas. Again, we didn't get much out of Ortegas this episode, but this episode actually has made me wonder, are they trying to make sure she doesn't appear like another Tom Paris? Because, I mean, both her and Tom Paris were introduced as excellent pilots, and all we've gotten to see of Ortegas is her being an excellent pilot. We don't get to see that much about her. Sure, some references to having served in the Klingon War and the trauma with that in a few episodes here and there, but not much. Is it because of how the Voyager writers basically, we need a character to do anything. Let's just give it to our pilot, Tom Paris. And so Tom Paris became basically a badass, good at nearly anything that he needs to do. Are they trying to avoid that with Ortegas? It's something I'm wondering, and could that be negatively impacting her character development? I also know that I believe the writers gave Ortegas his character that's to do because of personal stuff going on in the actor's life. So I think something going on there as well, but it almost makes me wonder, they're trying not to make her appear like another Tom Paris, which in any case might be hurting the character development of Ortegas. Of course, Omega's also, I mean, he's pretty competent in all regards, but he didn't get much to do in this episode, but I think that's because he's going to be doing a lot. Him and Sam Kirk are going to be doing a lot in the next episode. So, because they both want to study the Gorn and specifically study how to kill the Gorn. Yeah, Starfleet is definitely not happy with it going, and most of the officers feel the same way and are looking for ways to deal with it. Of course, one thing to note, like I said, Sam Kirk, well, we know when he dies, so we know he's gonna be fine. So, but who else is gonna be fine in that group? Because I think Mbenga appeared in 1 or 2 episodes of the original series, so he's probably fine as well. I'm pretty sure that was Mbenga. I know they've done a lot of development of his character. Basically, I think they took one of the background doctors in Star Trek's original series and actually made him into an actual character. But so I think those 2 are fine, but everyone else, we don't know if they're gonna be fine or not. But I think that's kind of the point. Sure, we got some characters because of this being a prequel, we know nothing's going to happen to, but we also got characters that we don't know what's going to happen to it. So we get the suspense. So we get the suspense of how the characters we know are going to survive, how they're going to survive. And the characters that we don't know, we're asking ourselves, will they survive? And is it going to be on their own accords? Do they need help? Like, lots of questions are being put to us for this. And I think that's creating a good lot of suspense. But man, I honestly wish season 3 will come out sooner. But of course, with the SAG-AFTRA strike and all that, yes, let them keep striking until they get what they want. The actors and the writers get a deal fair to them. So I think I can wait for that. But yeah, a lot has been going on and a lot of interesting stuff, and I really can't wait to see season 3. But like I said, we can wait, and we should wait while the actors and writers are on strike, demanding better payment, better conditions, all that normal stuff that they deserve for all the hard work and effort. But let's actually finish up this review with my concluding thoughts on the episode. Like I said in my introduction, I thought this was a great season finale. I did personally prefer season's 1 finale, and I think that one might be a little bit stronger. But in all honesty, this being a two-parter means I won't be able to form an exact and firm conclusion until season 3 comes out, when we can see part 2. So on Paramount, CBS, yeah, agree to the writers and actors' demands so we can see Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3. Please. And thank you. Oh, also, put Star Trek Prodigy back on Paramount Plus as well. It was a very good show. I would love to see the rest of it. But yeah, that's going to conclude my review of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Hegemony. I do hope you enjoyed my review. I would love to hear your thoughts on the episode in the comment section down below. There is so much more we can discuss, and I'm sure I'm leaving a lot of stuff out. So now that we've taken a look at each episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds individually, let's take a look at the season as a whole. I already mentioned in my intro how season 2 took risks, and every single time that worked out for them. Like, changing up genres, they did that a lot in season 1 as well, and they did that more so in this episode. Sometimes it's easier to switch up genres, like going from a suspense to a horror episode. Action, horror, that kind of stuff, romance even, makes a bit more sense. But they really took a swing and they hit it out of the park with the music episode. That was a genre switch that you typically don't see because it's a pretty big genre switch and it does not always work out. But man, did it work out for Strange New Worlds. And I hope to see more risks taken like that in the future for any Star Trek show, even Star Wars show as well, where they take more risks with exploring different genres and using those different genres to tell a story. I want to see more of that because it makes things exciting, especially with the shorter seasons. That's actually probably my biggest complaint about Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. And in fact, most modern storytelling on streaming services is how short the seasons are. 10 episodes, that's not a lot. Both Star Trek Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks I know are doing it. I have a feeling Star Wars Ahsoka's gonna be only around probably somewhere between 8 and 13 episodes. I actually don't know. Actually, I could look that up. Give me a second. Yeah, Ahsoka's only gonna be 8 episodes. Each season as a Mandalorian was a short number of episodes. And that's actually, I think, the biggest thing with modern storytelling is these short seasons. Doesn't give them as much room to breathe. You know, the fun romps and the serious episodes have to be one and the same. But again, sometimes you can make it work. And in Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks, I think have done a good job. In fact, they've done too good a job because I want them to do more of what they are doing in each season. No, maybe add an additional 2 episodes a season so we can have more fun with these characters. It puts them in these new, fascinating situations. I want more of that. Especially, especially Lower Decks, because they have shorter episodes, so they can do more, you would think. But animation, I know, does take more time than live action work because of that, some stuff, but I'm not a big expert on the intricacies of filmmaking and production work, but my point still stands. Seasons have gotten shorter, so that does put a lot less stress on them, but it also means there's more stress because each episode has to be a banger. It has to hit it out of the park. You can't have a flop. Like in a 28, 22 episode season, yeah, you can have a bad episode too, and people can just skip them over, and it won't impact their enjoyment of the season that much. But with only 8 episodes, 10 episodes, 12 episodes, however many been these short seasons, one bad episode could ruin the season for somebody. Didn't ruin anything for me. In fact, I didn't think there was any bad episodes. Yes, there were episodes I enjoyed more than others, because that's just the nature of things. But there was never an episode I didn't enjoy. And that is something to take a note of. I'm just going to bring in the Book of Boba Fett, another Star Wars show. It had basically 2-3 episodes dedicated to the main Mandalorian's character. In a 22 episode long season, we would have been like, okay, that makes some sense. Some interludes, this character is going to help Boba Fett out somehow, so we need to get caught up on him and what he's doing around this time frame. Okay, that makes sense. But with, I think, only 8 episodes, it was much more jarring, much more, oh, wait a second. This is Boba Fett show, not the Mandalorian show. Why is the Mandalorian taking over? Well, if there was more episodes, I don't think that would have been the case. So yeah. And also, here, going back to what I'm actually talking about in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, is the fact that that I know there's been a lot of talk that there's going to be an Ortega's episode, but we never really got one. As I understand, the actress, I forget her name, was going through some stuff, and thus they couldn't give her as demanding of a film schedule that having a full episode about her character would necessitate. But if they had more episodes, maybe they would have had more time to do that, and we wouldn't have to wait till season 3, where we'll hopefully get an Ortega's episode where we really explore her character. And so, like I said, my biggest qualm with Strange New Worlds is it was so good, but so short, and we didn't get enough good stuff out of it. Which is a very weird complaint, but also kind of reflective of the way the media industry is going with streaming these shorter, more tightly made seasons that are very well put together, very fun to watch, but leaves you wanting more. But at the same time, it gives, there are some drawbacks. These drawbacks being that, maybe if you want to do something risky, you don't have as much of the rest of the season to balance it out. Now, Strange New Worlds, they did risky with the music episode, but it worked out for them. They even did a risk when they opened up with an action piece instead of opening up with what ended up being episode 2 with basically the courtroom episode. That, based on the ending of season 1, should have been the beginning of season 2, but they took a risk by switching it around. And I do know some people had bigger qualms with that than I did, but at the same time, would they have as much qualms with that if this season was longer? It's only speculation, but I think it's something we really do need to discuss as we're going forward. The actors under SAG-AFTRA and the writers under the WGA are currently on strike, looking for better pay and better residuals from streaming. And if we're going this way with these more tightly packed seasons that are much quicker to write, but also less work for the actors, that could really impact lots of actors, especially new actors who don't have as much star power for bargaining. Just things to kind of take a note of, that as this media landscape with streaming develops, and as the streaming wars are coming to the end with things becoming highly segmented between the different studios, and additionally with prices constantly going up as they're trying to make ends meet, and probably going to be trying to pin the blame on the actors and not their own ineffective marketing or bloated budgets and elsewhere, high executive salaries. Just reduce those executive salaries a little bit, and guess what? You'll be able to pay your writers and also afford cheaper streaming services. Just an idea, networks, just an idea. But this does kind of remind me of in the early days of cinema, where basically the studios had basically the films came out on at exclusive theaters. Things were not as widely distributed as they are now, but they're kind of going back that way with streaming. So definitely much more easy to access a streaming service than it is a select group of theaters. But that is something to kind of take a note of. There is some reminiscence of the earlier days in cinema, when there were a lot more deals between the studios and the theaters. Not quite the same, but it is a monopoly, if you will, and something we should be aware of as studios are growing to increase their power at the expense of viewers, actors, writers, and everyone else who either works on or is a part of the enjoyment of media. So that's kind of a little bit sidetracked from Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, but I thought this was a good opportunity to discuss these topics, to begin my own discussion of them and explore them in a proper format, because this short season is kind of reflective of all these changes, of things that might be negatively impacting our enjoyment of media, because, with these short seasons, we'll never get another episode of Star Trek like Spock's Brain, if you will. Okay, I know some people may say that about Strange New Worlds musical episode, Subspace Rhapsody, but I firmly disagree. But, Spock's Brain is one of those episodes, like, it's so dumb, so stupid, so bad, that you just can't help but enjoy it. Will we ever get something like that again with these more tightly packed seasons? Honestly, I'm not sure, but it's fun to just have dumb, stupid, bad episodes that you can laugh at. And hopefully we do get that stuff again in the future, but I just don't know. And those really only work when you have a big season with a lot of other good episodes within it. But those are just my thoughts. But overall, like I said, I saw Strange New Worlds Season 2 was very well put together, did a good job in showcasing our characters, getting us to know them. A few of them, like Ortega's, we still need that development of, and hopefully we will get that in Season 3. But those are just my thoughts on all this. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. But in the meantime, thank you for watching, and live long and prosper. Thank you for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like, as well as subscribe to my channel and ring that bell to stay up to date on my latest content. Also, be sure to check out the link tree in the description, as well as any other links I have down there.